Okay, welcome back. Hey, that was a busy first part of lesson 2. Wow, to take a deep breath after that one. Very important to begin to see some of the pieces that now reside in these sections. We looked at the foundational section. Now we've looked at some pieces that fit into that. Some key words that give us an idea of what's going on in each of the books there, the 5 books, the Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And then some key people that flow all the way through that. You have watched these people and how God interacts with them, beginning with Adam and ending with Moses, and a few highlights in between that just begin to reveal to you how things are building up, how a people is being shaped, part of the covenant, and now as we move on from that, how they're going to begin to move into the land. Before we do that, let me just give you 7 themes that relate to this, and they're really important. Creation, the first theme that you encounter in the scriptures, and what I want you to see here basically, and it's going to relate to a key word for Genesis, it's the word beginnings. It's really beginnings explained. And the reason that that's a key, these beginnings explained, is that if these weren't explained, imagine jumping into the Bible without that piece. I mean, you would be left with bunches of questions. But God begins to lay down big pictures of how things get started. And the Torah is one of those places, and Genesis is rich with beginnings. Beginnings of creation, beginnings of covenant, unfortunately beginnings of death, beginnings of judgment, beginnings of God using people, building a people, creating a culture, becoming almost missionary-oriented to the culture they'll eventually be in. Just all of the teachings that go on here, preparing a people to be what He wants them to be and getting them ready to move into a land that He's going to eventually give them. Culture is the next piece, and what I'd like to just list there is we begin to learn about qualities. What are the qualities of culture that God desires? And we begin to see those qualities lived out as He begins to, particularly in Exodus, and in Leviticus, call the people to the way they would relate to Him and the things that are beginning to be expressed. And it's just important to look at that. And it will be important as we go on. When we get into the New Testament, we'll begin to look at the community of the church. And the same key will be there. As it's a culture, what's its purpose? What are the qualities expected? And how does God support and help and at times correct when we move off of those qualities? Character will also be important. And here we're thinking about qualities as well, but mostly we're thinking about qualities of relationship. What's the character of our relationship with one another? And again, those are very important in Torah. And be very important throughout the scriptures. How do we relate to each other under the context of the guidance of the Lord? Judgment will also be here. And what I want you to see here with judgment is not so much a negative piece of it as what it says to us that God has expectations and He means them. That is that He expects those expectations to be fulfilled. Redemption, one of the great aspects of His redemption is that failures can be reconciled, and they are, as we'll see in Torah, God provides ways for His people when they fail to come back to Him, to offer sacrifices and take other steps that begin to reconcile a relationship that's crucial to this section. We have a people that we're beginning to see watched, and these people are going to be called to be agents of God wherever they go. That's why it's so important that the culture and the character and expectations are met, and when things go astray, that people are quick to seek God's forgiveness and redemption. Why all of these things are in place is because of this. These people are called to be something in the larger culture. And if they fall away from these things, then they will have no impact. So that's how these fit together, and we can't forget covenant, which basically is the idea of agreements. And those agreements are established between God and His people. Sometimes disagreements are conditional. That is that they have conditions set to them that are like this, that if you do this, then I'll do this. If you don't do this, then this is what will happen. And some covenants are conditional, and some covenants are unconditional. Those covenants are often, we refer to them as promise. And in those cases, God promises something, and it's not up to us, it's up to Him. So God promises Abraham, I'm going to make of you a people, I'm going to give you a land, and I'm going to make you a blessing, and God promises it. It's not conditional. We'll run into other covenants that are more conditional, and we'll look at those as we can along the way, but you will see those. So these themes play their way throughout our section here that we called Torah. Hey, the arrow that I want you to look at here as we move toward the end of this session is the arrow of relationship. This is a crucial one. It's throughout the Torah, and it's the relationship of people to God, and it's the relationship of people to each other, and it becomes the relationship as well to foundational things that God teaches the people within this foundational section. So we see mostly a progressive revealing of God then and His connection and commitments to creation, and especially to mankind. We begin to see that work its way out. We see it in Adam and Eve, where there's a failure, and what happens there in the life of Cain and Abel, in Enoch, and Abraham and his family, and Joseph down through Moses. And all the way through this, we learn something about God in terms of how He engages people. And that's really what I would like you to think of as you look through this. So oftentimes we get caught up in the details of the law and all of those kinds of things. But how is it with a relationship? What is God trying to put in place so this relationship that He's creating with these people of promise has the effect it needs to have in the places that He's going to send them? And that's really a question for us to ask, who are followers of Christ as well, because that same pattern fits into the life that we're called to live. So that's what you're seeing. In the New Testament, you see it in, for instance, in John, where John looks at how this works its way out. And in John chapter 1 talks about the Word. It says the Word of God, that the Word was with God and the Word is God. And he says that nothing that was created outside of the Word, that He is indeed, the Word is the creator of all things. And then eventually in that same passage he says, and that Word, who he now identifies with Jesus Christ, he says that Word became flesh. And He pitched His tent among us. He dwelt among us. And we were able to see His glory. That glory, and whenever you think of glory and think of God in the same sentence, it's character. What is the character of this person like? One of those themes, right? Able to see His glory. The glory is of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. So what I want you to see here is what really in Exodus we see when Moses asks God, so who am I going to say sends me to these people? Who's going to send me here? And God begins to identify Himself. And here He says, you'll tell him, here's my name. I am who I am. And I want you to hold on to that, to just realize that now we're beginning to see, really from Adam, but especially in this section now as we're moving through Exodus to Deuteronomy, you begin to see God unfold for His people who He is. It's a progressive revelation, and frankly, they get it as they can do it. And when they don't do it, He backs them up and gives them a review, just like I do to you, and then they try again, because that's the way God works these. So as you're in here and you're watching this one, watch for the arrow of relationship. And you're going to see this arrow shoot its way all the way through the Old Testament, all the way into the New Testament, and all into the way of the time in which you and I live. Hey, well, that was lesson 2. I'll see you next in lesson 3.